Welcome back to the Arsenal. I know this is not a normal video I would be making, but people have asked me, how do I start Magic? And I thought this would serve to help them learn how to play and get started. But let me preference this video that I am in no way, shape, or form a good Magic player. At best, I play in bracket 2 to 3, which is just your standard casual play style. I don't really do a whole lot of complex decks. I usually run precons, or at the very least, like cards that at most cost like $10 for a single card, rather than, you know, the $200, $300 cards. But I'm rambling. What I do know is the basics of Magic. To begin, you will need a deck. This is where I would suggest something like a precon, as these are pre-constructed decks that you don't have to put in any effort for it to have a general play style, basically. It could be themed around your commander, or it could be themed around some form of playstyle like effect damage, milling, those things. But we'll get to that later. If you were to try to make your own custom deck, you are going to be searching through 29,000 different Magic cards. Right. Now that you've chosen your deck, and you're ready to play, you got it all nice and shuffled, and you've rolled your dice to see who goes first, or however your pod will decide that. You draw your 7. Let's say you have a pretty shit hand. This is where kind of talking to your pod to see what mulligan rules they use is a good idea. However, the standard rule is that you would set aside the cards that you drew into, and you would draw 7 new cards. Generally, most people would give you a free mulligan. Basically, you get to keep all 7 new cards. But if you mulligan again, you would drop 1 card. So your starting hand would, rather than being 7, would be 6. But again, check with your group, as some groups do play differently. But hey, you got your hand, and now you're ready to play Magic. But you're looking at 7 cards like, what the fuck am I even doing with these? You got some cards that are... You got some basics. You got a creature. Yeah, we got a fucking artifact. Oh, you got something called an enchantment aura. What the fuck is that? And you got an instant. Like, what is all this shit? Well, don't panic. This is... We'll learn this, alright, together. So the first rule that you should know about Magic is if you're in a 1v1, the first player does not draw a card. But we're going to act as if we're in a pot of 4, because that is where Commander, specifically, is designed around, is pods of 4. So, for our start of turn, you would draw a card, which we drew into another land. So, your first turn, you can play 1 land. This is true for every single turn. In Magic, you can only play 1 land per turn. But you may use that land the turn that it comes in. So you can tap it, which is just turning it sideways. And now we have this basically a pool that you don't actually see, obviously, but a pool of mana that we can draw from, which would allow us to play a card like Soul Ring, which is 1 generic mana. Generic just means that you can use literally any kind of mana for it, unless if there's restrictions, but again, we'll get to that later. Now you may be wondering, how the fuck do I know what kind of mana I have? Well, luckily, it's pretty easy. It's based off the color The lands usually will be based off of the color of the card. So in this instance, we have a green. Sol Ring actually doesn't have any colored mana. It is, when it is tapped, it has colorless, which is the little gray circle with the diamond in the middle. Meaning when tapped, you get 2 colorless mana. We don't have anything that we can play with colorless mana, so you just basically, this is where you would end your turn. Hello, Bappo. Yes, do you want to teach people how to play Magic? Thank you, buddy. You're very cute. You know, fuck it, we'll keep that in. You would pass your turn. Passing your turn goes into what is called the end step. This would clear up certain things, but we're not going to worry about that. Then you go into your next turn. We'll say that your pod just plays a bunch of tap lands and that's about it. So it comes to your turn, you go into untap, which just means you untap cards that were tapped. Go into your upkeep, which is generally things, cards will generally have the word upkeep in them, and that's where those cards would trigger. And then you would draw a card. In this instance, we can actually do quite a bit. We can play a land for turn, and then we can tap this green for a 1/1 Death Toucher. Now we won't really worry about Death Touch for right now. For all intents and purposes, this is just a 1/1 because it in the top right of the card it shows the mana pip required to cast this card. So hence why we used one of our lands. So it enters the field. However, it is affected by something called Summoning Sickness. Monsters, when they are first casted, cannot attack or use their tap abilities until a full rotation has happened, unless other things affect it. But again, we'll get to that later. Then, you can cast as many spells as you want, as long as you have the mana for it. So we will cast another green spell that is for 1 called Rancor. This says enchant target creature. Well, it doesn't say target, but enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has trample. Again, we're not going to worry about the trample side of things, but for all intents and purposes, it just buffs our 1/1. It is now a 3/1, so our creature is stronger than it is originally. However, we'll pass the turn on that because it cannot attack, go into our next turn, and this is where we'll finally play a different colored land. We'll play a swamp for turn, and for 2 mana, we will play something called a sorcery. A sorcery is basically a spell that you can only cast on your turn, and it is not a permanent. So once its effects resolve, it goes to the graveyard. What Farseek does for us is allow us to search for a forest card, put that onto the battlefield tapped. This is generally referred to as ramping. So we would search our library, grab ourselves a forest, we would shuffle our library, and then it enters in tapped, just like that. Awesome, great. We would then go into combat and swing with our 3/1 at some random player, we'll say. Great, we have done damage and we have casted a sorcery. We're doing a lot, but by all means, we are just playing regular old Magic. However, we have something that we can do on our opponent's turn. We have a little card called Entomb. It is an instant. Instant cards can actually be casted on your opponent's turns. Generally, this would be used to disrupt their plays and or buff up our side of the board, or even potentially save it. But in this case, for Entomb, we actually are going to be sending a card from our library to the graveyard. So on that last player before us, we would tap that 1 black, play Entomb, and we're going to go search our library for a creature card. And for all intensive purposes, we're going to grab a really good card for this sake. We're going to grab Anger. We would close it, so Entomb would go to grave, and Anger would go to grave. Now, having Anger in our grave does do us a lot of good, because while it's in the grave, while we control a mountain, our creatures gain haste. Haste is a way to get past Summoning Sickness. But again, we'll go more in depth on that in a future video. We go into our next turn. We will play a mountain. And for 4 mana, we will play our commander. Ophio? Mr. Ophio the Boulder. I cannot pronounce names, apparently. Commanders are always in basically a separate pile than our normal library that we always have access to. The main rules that you should know about your commander: if your commander ever dies, you can put it back into the command zone. If it gets exiled, you can put it back into the command zone. If it ever is shuffled back into your library, you can put it back into the command zone. Basically, your commander is always accessible. However, each time you cast it from the command zone, it gets commander taxed, meaning it will get 2 generic mana added to its mana cost per casting. Because this is our first time casting it, it does not have any tax. And its ability is not affected by Summoning Sickness at all. It is a triggered ability. So when we go to combat and we swing with our 3/1, our commander, the Boulder, would then target this creature and double its power, meaning it goes from a 3/1 to a 6/1. And yes, he can even target himself as long as he is attacking. But that only lasts until end of turn, so it's nice to get some heavy damage in, but it isn't permanent. And just like that, we end our turn. And this is the general basics of Magic. You play your land, you play your artifacts, you play your enchantments, and you play your creatures. And then you can play your instants and sorceries to better suit your deck. The main rules to refresh yourself on, always, is to remember that you can only play a land per turn. Check what your pod does for mulligans. If your pod just uses the default rules, they will let you mulligan your hand, draw 7 new cards, and usually you'll get 1 free, and then if you do it again, it's -1 card. You can play as many creatures, enchantments, artifacts, instances, and sorceries as long as you have the mana to cast them. Creatures are affected by something called Summoning Sickness, which makes it to where they cannot attack or use their tap abilities the turn they are summoned. However, things like enchantments and artifacts are actually not affected by this. So the turn they are placed onto the battlefield, you can use them. And this would go on for other things as well. I agree, Bappo. And to remember to have, well, basically fun. Magic is meant to be a casual game, unless you get into competitive. Which, if that's what you find fun, then great. You have done the thing that Magic is designed to be. We'll get into the keywords, basically, in the next video. That is where things like Death Touch, Haste, Double Strike, and all of those will be. Basically, I'm just going to be reading off of a Wikipedia page with a card in front of me to give an example. Besides that, thanks for watching. I don't know when that video will be out, hopefully soon. Just kind of depends on if life I'm also live on Twitch on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Some of those days I do play Magic. Other times I'm playing Warframe, Final Fantasy, Wind Rose, and various other games. So, and it is the same name, Aleister the Arsenal Keeper. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.